All right, so we have been progressing along in this Christian apologetic series, having done a video on the intro to Christian apologetics, the classical method, the evidential method, and the cumulative case method. And of course, the link to this playlist will be listed in the description box below. And look, if you hadn't had a chance to watch any of those videos, then I believe that you are really missing out. And I guess I want to be clear on exactly what you're missing out on, because I know that there is this weird stigma that has been placed on Christian apologetics in general, not just by unbelievers, but by some believers as well. And I feel like it actually stems from the critics of Christian apologetics painting with a broad brush when levying its criticisms against it. And you know what? It is actually due to these criticisms that some Christians have started to kind of refrain from delving into Christian apologetics altogether. They either don't see its value, or they believe it only attracts and or produces arrogant, self-absorbed Christians who use their knowledge for their own self-aggrandizement rather than for defending the gospel. And I guess I want to be very clear. There definitely is an aspect of that criticism that is certainly true, right? As long as there are wretched sinners walking the face of the earth, there will always be these type of vices that will inevitably show its ugly face, even in the most sacred areas of our lives. And you know what? This actually leads me to my critique of those who criticize Christian apologetics in general, right? I believe it is completely illogical to refrain from this field of study altogether just because there are those who misuse it. That, to me, that just doesn't make much sense at all, right? This world is plagued with people who misuse different types of field of study, such as science, math, history, etc., all the time. Yet we do not throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, with them. Now, do we? So why do we use this type of logic, this type of mentality with Christian apologetics, right? It seems really bizarre to apply this approach to Christian apologetics, but not to the other field of studies. It's as if we believe as Christians that science, math, and history are too vital for societal development to adopt such an absolute stance. But in the case of Christian apologetics, that nuance is just thrown out the window, right? And I guess that's what I want to kind of ward off in this video. That simplistic, stringent, and illogical attitude and approach that so many Christians adopt when discussing Christian apologetics, that view has stunted too many Christians from being able to grow in their assurance in their faith and from being able to defend their faith from other competing worldviews. And it has also kept them from being able to properly understand Christian apologetics in general, and also the presuppositional apologetic method in particular. Now, the reason why I say that is because this method, the presuppositional apologetic method, is one of the more controversial Christian apologetic methods, as it adopts a very, very aggressive approach for defending the truth of Christianity. And there are some who would shy away from using this method because they believe it creates the type of Christians that are arrogant and self-absorbed, you know, the type of people that I described a little earlier in this video. And I get that, right? Like I said earlier, there will be people who will misuse Christian apologetics and the presuppositional apologetic method in particular, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying to understand it as the field of study or as this method in particular, as the method and Christian apologetics are not bad in and of themselves. What's bad is the fact that people misuse it, right? So in this video, I want to help us understand the presuppositional method of apologetics and how it is used to defend the truth of Christianity. That's my goal here in this video, and I want to try to, have us give it a chance so that we can better understand it. Now, one of the things that has been helpful for me when breaking down these different types of apologetic methods is what I would do is start by showing how they are similar to some of the other methods that I've already covered, right? For example, you can see how one could get confused when trying to distinguish the classical method from the evidential method, or the evidential method from the cumulative case method, because there are certain aspects found in each of those methods that seem to overlap with one another, right? However, unfortunately, this is not going to be the case with the presuppositional method of apologetics, as this method makes a slightly different approach than the other methods that we've already covered. Whereas the classical, evidential, and cumulative case method treats the truth of Christianity as something to be proven when engaging with unbelievers, the presuppositional apologist does no such thing, as he presupposes the truth of Christianity at the outset. And this is actually what makes presuppositional apologetics, well, presuppositional apologetics. And this is why I stated in the beginning portion of my video that it takes on a very aggressive approach for defending the truth claims of Christianity, right? It's a bold tactic to presuppose the truth of the thing that is being contested in the first place. And of course, this is what makes the presuppositional apologetic method so controversial, as it is often accused of engaging in a sort of circular reasoning, if you will. Now, I'm going to set that comment aside for us right now, as I want you to take this video as an introductory video to understanding the presuppositional method of apologetics, and not necessarily as a video that's going to start delving into the objections to it or the criticisms of it, right? I want you to be able to understand it first before you be exposed to the objections that some may have against it, right? So let's properly define the presuppositional apologetic method to better understand exactly what it is, because I think a lot of the objections that people levy against the presuppositional method of apologetics is because they simply don't know it, right? So anyway, like I mentioned earlier, the key distinctive that separates the presuppositional method from the other Christian apologetic methods is found in the word presuppositional. Now, the word presuppositional means a thing tactically assumed beforehand at the beginning of a line of argument or course of action. So in this case, the thing being tactically assumed beforehand for the presuppositional apologist is the truth of Christianity. I've already said that multiple times before, but it's worth reiterating. Now, the reason why the presuppositional apologist does this is not because he has engaged in some type of Kierkegaardian fideism, right? And for those who don't know what Kierkegaardian fideism is, it is basically the belief that Kierkegaard held that one could not defend the truth claims of Christianity by using reason and logic and things of that nature. And so he believed that we ought to hold to these truth claims by faith alone, right? So if you ever encounter most people don't refer to this as Kierkegaardian fideism, right? If you say that to probably your parents or something like that, they probably won't understand exactly what you're talking about. But it's that kind of attitude that some Christians adopt where they're like, look, I don't know how to explain, how Christianity is true. I just know from inside of me and from my own personal experience that, Christianity is true, that God exists, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how to articulate it. I don't know how to explain it. I just believe that it's true. And so that's kind of the attitude that Kierkegaard adopted in his time, right? Where he was like, look, I don't know if we can necessarily explain it because there seems to be an objection to everything. So the only thing that we can truly hold on to is our faith, right? Now, obviously, there's a lot of Christians who had something to say about that, but I'm not going to get into that here. That's just for you in understanding exactly what I'm getting at here. And obviously, that's not what the presuppositional apologist is doing here either. The reason why he presupposes the truth of Christianity is because he understands that everyone is coming to the table with their own presuppositions. So if everyone is bringing their own presuppositions to the table, why can't the Christian apologist do the same, right? For example, if an atheist presupposes that materialistic naturalism is true, or a Muslim presupposes that Islam is true, why should the Christian apologist abandon his belief that Christianity is true when no one else has abandoned theirs? It's as if there is some type of imbalance that needs correction here. Perhaps the solution is not to discard our presuppositions, which wouldn't have entirely been possible in the first place, but rather let's compare them instead, right? By doing this, we're going to see which presupposition aligns best with reality and which one aligns best with the truth. It's in this context where I believe presuppositional apologetics shines the brightest. It's because it does a great job in calling its opponents out on their crap, right? Returning to the topic of the materialistic naturalist for a moment, do you know there's no way that you would prove naturalism to be the absolute truth, right? For those who may not be familiar with what naturalism is the philosophical belief that everything arises from natural properties and causes. And what they do is they take supernatural and spiritual explanations and they exclude them or just discount them entirely. All right, so now that you understand the definition of naturalism, how do you suppose one should best go about proving that this belief is the ultimate truth, right? Well, I believe the best answer is very simple. You can't. Unlike the materialistic naturalist, the presuppositional apologist has a plethora of ways to go about proving his belief in Christianity to be the absolute or ultimate truth. Now, although, and I do have to mention this, although there are numerous ways in which the apologist could defend the faith, typically, and this is the most preferred way that most presuppositional apologists like to defend the faith, is by using the transcendental argument for the existence of God as the starting point for his defense of the faith. And I want you to remember something. Remember that his starting point is not like that of the classical or the evidential or even the cumulative case method. The presuppositional apologist is starting with the presupposition that God exists and then is defending that presupposition from that point on. That's something that you always have to remember. Obviously, it's baked in the name presuppositional, right? Now, I want to return for a moment and explain it as to why that is before I begin defining what the transcendental argument is in greater detail, because I believe understanding this point is incredibly crucial to understanding this method in general, right? The reason why the presuppositional apologist starts with the belief that God exists is because they believe that to concede the possibility of God's non-existence to atheists would be antithetical to what's taught in Scripture. That's really, really crucial, really, really important. You're going to see a lot of presuppositional apologists kind of make this case in their videos and in their argumentation of why they don't use things like natural theology and things of that nature, right? You'll see a lot of presuppositional apologists have a kind of, how to best describe it, allergic reaction to using philosophical arguments, natural theology. They don't believe it's bad. Well, some don't believe it's bad. Others, they kind of do in and of themselves, but they just believe that we don't want to give the atheists any ground, right? Hence why they start with the presupposition that God exists. And the main passage from which they derive this conviction is actually found in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 22, where the apostle Paul writes this: "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of this world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things." So, as you can see, the presuppositional apologist concludes from this passage of Scripture that everyone, including atheists, inherently understands the existence of God, or at least a concept of him. Some go as far as asserting that there are no true atheists, right? Just delusional theists, or theists who simply are in denial of their own belief in God. Others, like myself, I'm not necessarily a presuppositional apologist, but I would fall in this camp. Others don't feel the need to make such a claim. Instead, they propose the idea, as Paul does, that an atheist's disbelief in God is actually rooted in a moral issue, not merely an intellectual one. It's not about the atheist's struggle to comprehend the concept of God, right? They understand perfectly well the progression of a theist's belief or argumentation for the existence of God. They understand the evidences. They simply choose not to believe it, right? And I think the most compelling evidence for asserting the conclusion that the atheists struggle with their disbelief in God is not merely an intellectual issue, but also a moral one, can be found by examining the pattern of human civilization. Think about it. In every culture, in every part of the world, one thing that each civilization has in common with each other is the belief in God. Now, the understanding of God may vary across civilizations, but the belief in God is still present nonetheless. Paul suggests that it's no coincidence that we all have a belief in God, even if it is a perverted one, even if it is a one that resembles like mortal men like Zeus or Poseidon, etc., right? He asserts that this belief has been hardwired into us because we were made in the image of God. Thus, for an atheist to conclude that there is no God, despite the overwhelming external and internal evidence to the contrary, it has to be, and it must be, due to a moral issue rather than simply an intellectual one. Now, I want you to take note in how I'm not just saying that this isn't an intellectual issue, right? Because it is, right? If you've been paying attention, you'd recognize that I keep emphasizing that it's not merely an intellectual issue. I don't want us to fall into this either or logical fallacy. The issue is both moral and intellectual, right? In this passage, Paul illustrates this progression where the issue of unbelief begins with the unbeliever suppressing the known truth about God, specifically his invincible attributes, as Paul states in verse 20. Then the moral issue kind of evolves into an intellectual one. And it kind of starts to impact how the unbeliever perceives not only the truth about God, but also the truth about morality, truth itself, the world, and themselves in general, right? This is what theologians refer to as the noetic effects of sin. Noetic here means it refers to one's mental activity or intellect, right? Sin is like a cancer. If it's left unattended, it's going to start to spread and affect every fiber of our being, including the mind, right? And so here we see the crux of the issue from the vantage point of the presuppositional apologist, and actually for most Christians for that matter, which is that the unbeliever is in desperate need of the regenerative work of the Holy Spirit. Now, while every Christian apologist acknowledges that this is the heart of the issue for the unbeliever, remember that the disagreement doesn't lie here, right? Instead, it lies in how the Christian apologist should respond to the charges that have been levied against the Christian faith, right? For the presuppositional apologist, reasoning with someone who doesn't acknowledge the source of reason itself seems absolutely pointless. However, he does so because the scripture instructs us to be ready to defend the hope that is within us. On top of that, there is a real wisdom in answering a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes, as Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 26, verse 5. It's actually one of my favorite verses because it actually goes on to say, also don't answer a fool according to his folly. There's wisdom in knowing when to do that action of answering a fool according to his folly in different situations. But anyway, I digress. So how does the presuppositional apologist goes about defending the faith practically? Well, this actually brings us back to the transcendental argument for the existence of God that I mentioned earlier in this video. Remember how I mentioned that this is usually the starting point for most presuppositional apologists when defending the faith, right? The argument is actually pretty straightforward and highly persuasive from a rhetorical standpoint. I actually started to really like it as I started to delve deep into just preparing this video. In short, the transcendental argument for the existence of God is a philosophical argument that attempts to demonstrate God's existence by arguing that logic, morality, scientific truths, that they presuppose a divine foundation. And the core idea is that without God, these truths would not be intelligible or even possible for that matter, right? A version of this argument was initially developed by Immanuel Kant in his book, The One Possible Basis for a Demonstration of the Existence of God. I think it's one of the books that I want to really delve into and read whenever I have the time and a chance. But it was later polished and popularized by Cornelius Van Til in his book, A Survey of Christian Epistemology. And so since then, right, since those two great minds have used this argument, and, obviously Cornelius Van Til has popularized it, the presuppositional apologists have employed this argument to reveal the Christian foundation that atheists borrow from to critique Christianity itself, right? Now, when you're thinking about this argument, here's how I want to help you think about it, because I got to introduce the nuance of thinking about the transcendental argument for the existence of God. Look, at its best, this argument establishes the existence of God as a priori, which means that his existence is a prerequisite. It is a particular truth necessary for other general truths to be valid. Now, at its worst, this argument simply removes the veil from underneath the atheist charges to reveal that they are standing on thin air, essentially, that they have no basis or foundation from which they derive their truth claims or their critiques of our truth claims, right? They're basing it on nothing. Even if the argument doesn't succeed in establishing this existence of God. Now, for example, I want you to think about the idea of absolute truth. So I want to use this transcendental argument in practice right now, right? So again, we're thinking about the idea of absolute truth. If there is no God, who decides what's true and what's not? So someone using this argument might say that the fact that absolute truth exists is evidence for the existence of God. It's like saying, if there's no boss at work, who decides what to do, right? The existence of a boss makes sense of how things work. Otherwise, everyone is basically just going to be doing whatever they want to do, right? Or you can use the concept of morality as another example of how we can use the transcendental argument for the existence of God. If there's no ultimate moral authority, why should we adhere to any moral principles, right? Again, we can say that the existence of objective morality suggests the existence of a moral lawgiver, which is God. So the very existence of morality implies the existence of God. I also love how this can be applied to how we think about logic, right? I'll use the law of non-contradiction to illustrate my point. This law states that something cannot be both true and false at the same time and in the same sense. So the existence of these fundamental laws of logic, which govern rational thought and discourse, implies the existence of a transcendent rational mind, again, that being God, right? Without a divine source for these laws, it's going to be extremely difficult to explain why they exist in the first place. And secondly, and I think more importantly, why they are universally applicable, right? Therefore, the existence of logical principles could be seen as a type of evidence, again, for the existence of God. And again, this is all different ways how we can use the transcendental argument for the existence of God. I want to use one last example. I want us to consider the existence of consciousness. I really love this one. Consciousness refers to our subjective awareness and experience of the world around us, right? How we think, how we move, how we perceive everything that kind of transpires around us. We know that consciousness cannot be adequately explained by purely materialistic or naturalistic explanations alone. We know this, right? You can say that consciousness is just our neurons firing, but that really doesn't explain anything, now does it? So the existence of consciousness suggests the presence of something beyond the physical realm, right? Something immaterial or transcendent. And since consciousness cannot be reduced to mere physical processes, its existence again implies the existence of a transcendent consciousness, which what we believe and what we would say is God. So, in other words, God is seen as the ultimate source or ground of consciousness that provides a coherent explanation for the existence of consciousness itself. Therefore, again, we can use this argument from consciousness to establish the existence of God. Now, from the transcendental argument for the existence of God, the presuppositional apologists could go into arguing for the evidences for Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, and so on and so forth, right? And he does all this without relinquishing any ground to the unbeliever, maintaining his presupposition that Christianity is true through the whole process of defending his faith. And I could, obviously expound on the historical and different philosophical arguments that the apologists could use, but I believe this video is already long enough. And also I plan on doing separate videos for each philosophical and historical argument for the existence of God and Christianity at a later time. Right now, I just wanted to give you an idea of how the transcendental argument would be used by presuppositional apologists and just give you a general framework for understanding this method in particular. But for the time being, right, I want to end this video by recommending some books for you if you like the presuppositional apologetic method and you just want to learn more about it, right? So let's first start with the father of presuppositional apologetics, that being Cornelius Van Til. He actually has two books that I want to recommend to you. The first one is The Defense of the Faith, and the second one is titled Christian Apologetics. Next, I have Greg Bahnsen's book, Always Ready, Directions for Defending the Faith. I think that's definitely going to be a good read for you. And then lastly, I have Francis A. Schaeffer's book, Escape from Reason. And I'm going to have all of these books listed in the description box below. But anyways, guys, that's going to be the video. Let me know what you think about the presuppositional method of apologetics below. I'm very interested to see what y'all thoughts are on it. I know that this is one of the more controversial apologetic methods. I know a lot of times that this apologetic method kind of lends itself or is used by a lot of arrogant type Christians and things of that nature. But I really want you to find a way to put that part aside, put the misuse of the presuppositional apologetic method aside, and actually give it a fair shake, right? To try to understand it a lot better, right? Because I think that when it's understood correctly, it actually does a really great job in being able to defend the faith of Christianity against its criticisms and things of that nature. But anyway, let me know what you think about the method in the description, in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does mean a lot. We have been growing as of late, and I really do appreciate everybody that has been tuning in, watching these videos, liking, sharing it on their different social media platforms. I really do appreciate it. But until next time, guys, peace.